Laughter rippled through the busy Kampala street as Alice Namazi stumbled, her worn shoes barely holding together her once elegant posture, now reduced to exhaustion and shame. Just days ago, she had been a respected CEO, now strangers pointed, whispering her name like a cautionary tale. Then, in a moment, no one understood, she stopped in front of a filthy old beggar and placed her last $100 into his shaking hands. Gasps followed. She had nothing left, and still gave it away. The old man slowly raised his head, his eyes no longer weak but piercing, almost powerful. As Alice walked away, no one noticed. He was watching her like she had just altered his fate. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? And if stories like this move, you don't forget to subscribe. Alice Namazi had once walked into rooms where conversation stopped, not because people feared her, but because they respected her. In the heart of Kampala's fast-growing tech district, her name had carried weight. Investors listened, competitors watched, young women whispered her story like a promise that someone like them could rise, lead, and win. She had built Namazzi Pay, a fintech company designed to bring financial access to small traders across Uganda market, women boda drivers, street vendors who had never trusted banks. What started as a small idea in a cramped apartment had grown into a company valued in millions. She wasn't just successful, she was meaningful, but power attracts shadows. And Alice didn't see them forming, not at first. It began subtly. Board meetings that felt colder than usual. Documents sent to her late at night buried under layers of legal language. Questions about risk exposure and debt structuring that didn't quite align with the company's real performance. At the center of it all stood Patrick Okello, the board chairman, older, polished, always calm. He had once mentored her, or at least that's what she believed. He spoke gently, called her daughter in public, praised her vision in interviews. But behind closed doors, his tone had begun to change. "You need to think bigger, Alice," he would say, fingers steepled, eyes unreadable. "Growth requires bold financial moves." She trusted him. That was her first mistake. Then there was Vanessa Nanyonga, brilliant, strategic, always impeccably dressed. Alice had hired her as head of operations 2 years earlier, impressed by her sharp thinking and confidence. Vanessa was the kind of woman who could walk into chaos and organize it within hours. But she was also ambitious. And ambition, when mixed with envy, can become something dangerous. At first, Vanessa was loyal, or appeared to be. She worked late, took initiative, supported Alice in meetings, until she didn't. The shift was almost invisible. Emails where Vanessa copied the board, but not Alice. Meetings held on behalf of leadership without her knowledge. Small decisions being made without her approval. By the time Alice noticed, Vanessa had already positioned herself not as a subordinate, but as an alternative. And then there was Brian Simanda, the man who had once held her hand and promised her a future. He had been there from the beginning, back when Namazzi Pay was just an idea scribbled on paper. He celebrated her wins, comforted her. Losses told her she didn't have to carry everything alone. She believed him. She even said yes when he proposed. Their engagement had been public, beautiful, symbolic, the power couple of Kampala's new generation. But love, Alice would later learn, can also be transactional, especially when money is involved. The collapse didn't happen in one moment. It happened in layers. First came the sudden audit, a routine review requested by the board. Then came the findings, claims of mismanaged funds, inflated projections, risky loans taken under Alice's leadership. She was stunned. "These numbers don't make sense," she said, flipping through pages, her voice tight with disbelief. "We never approved these transactions." Patrick sighed, shaking his head slowly as if disappointed. "That's exactly the problem, Alice. As CEO, everything falls under your responsibility." Vanessa remained silent during that meeting. Too silent. Alice noticed, but too late. Within weeks, investors began pulling out. Articles started appearing online. Namazzi, pay under investigation. CEO, accused of financial misconduct. The headlines spread faster than the truth could. Calls stopped coming. Partners withdrew. Employees whispered. And Brian. Brian changed. At first he said it didn't matter. "We'll get through this," he told her, holding her hands. But as the pressure grew, so did his distance. He stopped answering calls quickly, canceled meetings, avoided being seen with her in public. Until one evening in her once luxurious apartment overlooking the city, he finally said what she had been fearing. "I can't go down with you, Alice." The words didn't sound angry. They sounded practical. "My family is involved in international business," he continued, pacing slowly. "This scandal, it affects everything. My reputation, my future." She stared at him, not recognizing the man in front of her. "So that's it," she whispered. "After everything, Brian didn't meet her eyes. I didn't sign up for this." That night, something inside Alice didn't just break. It collapsed. The engagement ended quietly. No public statement, no dramatic confrontation, just silence. But the world noticed anyway. Photos of Brian attending events alone, smiling, circulated online. Comments followed. She was never on his level. He was smart to leave before it got worse. The humiliation was complete. Then came the final blow. A legal notice, debt obligations, assets frozen, her accounts locked. Within days, Alice went from owning boardrooms to standing outside her own apartment, her belongings packed into 2 small bags. The landlord didn't even look at her. "I'm sorry," he said flatly. "Orders from above." She knew what that meant. Patrick. Everything traced back to him. But she had no proof, no power, no allies left. That afternoon, as she sat on a bench by the roadside watching cars rush past like nothing had changed, Alice finally allowed herself to think the thought she had been avoiding. This wasn't failure. This was a setup, a calculated fall. Every document, every accusation, every silence from Vanessa, every step Brian took away from her. It all aligned too perfectly. Her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the realization of how deeply she had been betrayed. She had built something real, and they had taken it. Not just the company, her name, her identity, her dignity. For the first time since everything began, anger rose through her grief, but it wasn't loud. It was quiet, heavy, dangerous. Because beneath that anger was a question she couldn't answer yet. Why destroy her so completely? What had she missed? Who had she trusted too easily? And most importantly, was there anything left of her life to rebuild? The city moved on around her. Vendors shouting, engines roaring, people laughing. Life continued indifferent to her fall. But Alice Namazi sat still. No office, no title, no fiancé, no home, just 2 bags. And a truth beginning to form in her mind. She hadn't just lost everything. Everything had been taken. By the 3rd day, hunger stopped feeling like pain. It became something quieter, something heavier. Alice Namazi no longer felt the sharp clawing emptiness in her stomach the way she had the first night she slept outside. Now it was a dull ache, constant, familiar, almost numb. Her body had begun to adjust, but her mind had not, because hunger was not just about food. It was about reality. Every passing hour reminded her that the life she once lived was gone, not paused, not waiting, gone. That morning, the sun rose harsh and unforgiving over Kampala's crowded streets. Vendors were already setting up, calling out prices. Boda-bodas weaved recklessly through traffic. The city was alive, loud, relentless, and completely indifferent to her. Alice stood near a small roadside kiosk, counting the last of her money. 1 crumpled note. $100. It felt heavier than it should. not because of its value, but because it was all she had left in the world. She stared at it for a long moment, her fingers tightening slightly. This could buy her food for a few days. Maybe even a cheap place to sleep for one night if she stretched it carefully. This was survival. Her survival. She exhaled slowly, folding the note with care, as if that small act could somehow preserve control over her life. Then she stepped forward. The smell of frying oil and fresh bread drifted through the air as she approached the kiosk. The vendor, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, barely looked at her. "What do you want?" the woman asked flatly. Alice hesitated. That alone felt strange. There had been a time when she ordered meals without checking prices. Now every coin mattered. "Just bread," she said quietly. The woman handed her a small loaf, wrapped loosely in paper. Alice passed over a few smaller notes from the change she had kept aside earlier, carefully avoiding touching the $100 bill. Not yet. She moved away from the kiosk and found a quiet corner near a cracked wall. Sitting down slowly, she held the bread in her hands. It was still warm. For a moment, she closed her eyes. This simple thing felt like everything. She tore off a small piece, raising it toward her mouth. And then, a sudden commotion broke the moment. "Move away! Get out of here!" Alice turned instinctively. A few meters away, near the entrance of a small shop, a frail old man was being shoved aside by a security guard. His clothes were dirty, worn beyond repair. His hands trembled as he tried to steady himself against the wall. "I'm not stealing," the man said weakly. "I'm just sitting," I said. "Move." The guard snapped, pushing him harder. The old man stumbled, nearly falling. Some people nearby laughed. Others watched with mild curiosity, but no one stepped forward. It was a familiar scene. Too familiar. Kampala had many like him, forgotten, dismissed, invisible. Alice looked back at the bread in her hand. Then at the old man. Something inside her tightened. No, not tightened, recognized, because just days ago she had been the one people respected. And now she wasn't so different from him. Invisible, disposable. She stood up slowly. Her body hesitated, but her feet moved anyway. "Stop," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was enough. The guard turned, frowning. "This doesn't concern you," he said sharply. Alice stepped closer, her gaze steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "He's not doing anything wrong." The guard scoffed. "Then you take him with you." A few bystanders chuckled. Alice ignored them. Instead, she walked past the guard and crouched slightly in front of the old man. Up close, she saw more than just poverty. She saw dignity. His eyes, though tired, were clear, observant, present, not broken. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. The man nodded slowly. "I've had worse days," he said. There was something strange in his tone. Not bitterness, not desperation. Just calm. Alice hesitated. Then she looked down at the bread in her hand. Without overthinking, she broke it in half and offered it to him. He accepted it, but his gaze never left her face. "You shouldn't give away what you need," he said quietly. Alice let out a faint, tired breath. Maybe she replied, "But I know what it feels like to be pushed aside, like you don't matter." The old man studied her, carefully, as if trying to understand something deeper. Alice sat beside him on the ground, ignoring the stares. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply ate. Two strangers, sharing silence, sharing survival. Then after a while, Alice reached into her pocket. Her fingers brushed against the folded note. The $100. She froze. This was different. Bread was one thing. This was everything she had left. Her heart began to beat faster. Logic spoke first. "Don't do this. You need it. No one is coming to save you." She knew all of that. Every word was true. But then another thought surfaced, quieter, stronger. If I walk away now, what does that make me? Alice closed her eyes briefly, just for a second. Then she pulled the note out. The old man noticed the movement. His gaze shifted to the money, then back to her. "You need that," he said. It wasn't a question. Alice swallowed. "Yes," she admitted. A pause. A long one. Then, without allowing herself time to think again, she placed the folded $100 into his hands. The old man didn't react immediately. He simply stared at it, then at her. Why, he asked. Alice shook her head slightly. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe. Because I still want to believe people can choose to be kind even when it makes no sense." Her voice cracked slightly at the end. Not from weakness, from truth. The old man's fingers slowly closed around the money. For a moment something shifted in his expression. Something deeper than gratitude. Something almost startled. Alice stood up. If she stayed, she might regret it. And she couldn't afford regret. "Not now. Take care of yourself," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked away. No dramatic pause, no looking back, just forward, step by step, into uncertainty. Behind her, the street returned to normal. People moved on. The guard shrugged. The moment faded for everyone else, but not for him. The old man, still sitting by the wall, watched her as she disappeared into the crowd. His posture slowly changed. The frailty, less convincing now. His eyes sharpened, focused, alive. He looked down at the money in his hand, then back at the direction she had gone. And for the first time since anyone had seen him sitting there, he smiled. Not like a beggar, but like a man who had just witnessed something rare, something valuable, something worth remembering. Softly, almost to himself, he murmured, "A woman who gives everything when she has nothing." He leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. Then his voice lowered, barely audible beneath the noise of the street. "This changes things." Long after Alice Namazi disappeared into the crowded streets of Kampala, the old man remained seated by the cracked wall, the folded $100 still resting in his palm. Around him, life resumed its usual rhythm. Vendors shouted prices. Children ran past barefoot. Boda-bodas honked impatiently as they squeezed through impossible gaps. The security guard who had shoved him earlier had already forgotten him now, leaning lazily against the shop entrance. To everyone else, nothing had changed. But something had. The old man slowly exhaled, then straightened his back, not with the stiffness of age, but with deliberate control. The slight tremble in his hands faded, his shoulders squared. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable. Gone was the fragile helplessness. In its place, composure, authority. He glanced once more in the direction Alice had gone, his eyes narrowing slightly as if committing her presence to memory. Then, without a word, he reached into the torn inner lining of his coat and pulled out a small, almost invisible device. A communicator, sleek, modern, hidden in plain sight. He pressed it once. "Where are you?" A calm voice asked immediately on the other end. The old man's tone when he replied was no longer weak. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he said. A pause. Then the voice softened slightly. "Mr. Cato, we've been looking for you for hours. The security team." "Stand down," he interrupted. Firm, controlled. There was no argument after that. "Yes, sir." The line went silent. The man, no longer simply a beggar, closed his hand around the device and slipped it back into his coat. Samuel Cato, a name that carried weight far beyond the streets of Kampala. A man whose influence stretched across East Africa, banking telecommunications infrastructure. Deals were made or broken based on his approval. Governments listened when he spoke. And for the past several weeks, he had been invisible. Not by accident, but by choice. Samuel leaned back against the wall, his gaze thoughtful. The $100 in his hand felt heavier now, not because of its value, but because of what it represented. He had been watching people, testing them. After what had happened within his own company, his own family, he had needed to see something for himself. Truth. Not the polished version presented in boardrooms. Not loyalty that came with contracts and conditions. But something raw, unfiltered, real. His younger brother had tried to push him out of his own empire. Quietly, strategically, board members bribed, documents manipulated, trust weaponized. Samuel had seen it coming just in time, but it had left something behind. A question he couldn't ignore. If even family could betray you for power, what was left that could be trusted? So he stepped away, disappeared, stripped himself of status, of protection, of identity, and walked the streets as someone the world did not see. A beggar, a man people avoided, ignored, or pushed aside. And what he saw confirmed his worst fears. Most people looked through him. Some looked at him with pity but kept walking. A few mocked him openly. Kindness. It existed, but it was rare, small, careful, calculated, until today. Samuel looked down at the money again. Alice Namazi. He hadn't known her name when she approached him, but he had seen her before. Not here, not like this. On screens, in interviews, in headlines, a rising star, a CEO with vision. Then just as quickly, a scandal, a collapse, a fall. He remembered the news. He also remembered how quickly everyone had turned against her. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Until now, because today he hadn't seen a fallen CEO. He had seen a woman with nothing left, who still chose to give. That didn't fit the narrative. And Samuel Cato did not ignore contradictions. He slowly pushed himself to his feet. This time there was no hesitation, no sign of weakness, just quiet control. The security guard nearby glanced at him briefly, then looked away again, uninterested, still invisible. Samuel allowed a faint, almost amused breath to escape him. Good. Let them not see. Not yet. He stepped away from the wall and began walking, not aimlessly, but with direction. A few minutes later, he turned into a narrow side street. Quieter, less crowded. At the end of it, a black SUV sat parked discreetly, engine off, windows tinted. The moment Samuel approached, the driver's door opened. A man in a sharp suit stepped out quickly, his expression tense with concern. Sir Samuel raised a hand. The man stopped immediately. No further words, no questions. Samuel walked past him and entered the back seat of the vehicle. The door closed softly. Inside, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Clean, controlled, secure. A tablet lay waiting on the seat beside him. Prepared. Samuel picked it up. His movements calm but purposeful. "Find her," he said. The man in the front seat didn't need clarification. "Yes, sir. Everything," Samuel continued. "I want her full history, financial records, legal documents, business dealings, personal connections." A pause. Then more quietly, "And I want to know why she fell." The man nodded. "It will be done." Samuel leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting to the window. Outside, the same city continued, unaware of what had just shifted beneath its surface. "Alice Namazi," he murmured under his breath. There was no admiration in his tone. Not yet. Only curiosity. Sharp, focused, because people like her did not give away their last lifeline without reason. And Samuel intended to understand that reason. The car engine started smoothly. As they pulled away from the quiet street and merged back into the chaos of Kampala. Samuel remained silent, but his mind was already moving, pieces aligning, questions forming, and somewhere beneath all of that interest, Not in her fall, but in who she truly was beneath it. Because if what he saw today was real, then the story the world believed about Alice Namazi was incomplete, and Samuel Cato had built his empire on uncovering truths others missed. As the city blurred past the tinted windows, he gave one final instruction. Discreetly, he said, "I don't want her to know." "Yes, sir." The SUV disappeared into traffic, invisible again, just like him, but not for long, because somewhere in the city, walking with nothing left, was a woman who had just unknowingly stepped into the path of a man who never ignored what mattered. And for the first time in weeks, Samuel Cato felt something shift inside him. Not trust, not yet, but something close. Recognition of something rare, something dangerous, something powerful. And he knew, with absolute certainty, this was only the beginning. By nightfall, the city no longer felt loud to Alice Namazi. It felt distant, as if she were walking through it, but no longer part of it. Her steps had slowed not just from exhaustion, but from uncertainty. For the first time since losing everything, there was nothing urgent left to do. No meetings to attend, no calls to return, no strategy to fix, just survival. And even that felt unclear. The streets of Kampala began to shift as evening settled in. Vendors packed up their stalls. Lights flickered on in small shops. The smell of grilled meat and charcoal drifted through the air, reminding Alice of something she could no longer afford. She hadn't eaten since the morning, and now she had no money left, not even enough for a piece of fruit. Her stomach tightened slightly, but she ignored it. She had made her choice, and she refused to regret it. Still, the reality was undeniable. She had nowhere to go. Her feet carried her without direction, until she found herself standing in front of a modest church compound, tucked between two aging buildings. The gate was open. Inside, a few people sat quietly on benches, while others moved slowly in and out of a side hall. A small sign hung near the entrance, "Hope Shelter. All are welcome." Alice stood there for a moment, reading it twice. All are welcome. The words felt almost unreal. She hesitated, not because she didn't need help, but because asking for it felt like crossing a line she had never imagined reaching. She had once been the one others came to for help. Now, she was here. After a long pause, she stepped inside. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. A middle-aged woman wearing a simple headscarf approached her gently. "Good evening," the woman said, her voice warm but calm. "Are you looking for a place to stay?" Alice opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. She wasn't used to this, to being seen like this. "Yes," she finally said, her voice quiet. "Just for tonight." The woman nodded without hesitation. "You're welcome here," she said. "My name is Sister Grace." Alice managed a small nod. Alice. Sister Grace didn't react to the name. There was no recognition, no judgment, just acceptance. "Come," she said, softly. Inside the hall, the air was cooler. Thin mattresses lined the floor, spaced neatly apart. A few women sat together quietly. A child coughed softly in one corner. Someone else murmured a prayer under their breath. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe. For now. Sister Grace handed her a folded blanket. "We don't have much," she said, "but you can rest here tonight. There's some food left if you haven't eaten." Alice hesitated again, then shook her head slightly. "I'm okay." It wasn't true, but she couldn't bring herself to take more. Not after what she had already given away. Sister Grace studied her for a moment as if she understood more than Alice had said. Then she simply nodded. "Rest," she said. Alice found an empty space near the wall and sat down slowly. The thin mattress barely cushioned the hard floor beneath it. But as she lay back staring at the ceiling, Something unexpected happened. Her body relaxed. Not fully, but enough. Because for the first time in days, she wasn't being watched, not judged, not whispered about, just allowed to exist. Hours passed quietly. The room dimmed as lights were turned off one by one. Soft breathing filled the space, the occasional cough, the faint sound of traffic outside. Alice closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. Her mind drifted back uninvited. Boardrooms, screens, headlines, Brian's voice, Patrick's calm betrayal, Vanessa's silence. It all replayed, again and again, until her chest tightened. She turned onto her side, pulling the thin blanket closer. And for the first time since everything collapsed, tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, steady. Because grief, she realized, didn't need an audience. It only needed space. And tonight, she finally had it. Across the room, a soft whimper broke the silence. Alice opened her eyes. A young boy no older than 7 lay curled beside a woman who looked barely awake herself. The boy's breathing was uneven, his small body trembling slightly. Alice pushed herself up slowly. She hesitated, then stood. Walking over quietly, she crouched beside them. "Is he okay?" she whispered. The woman looked up, her eyes tired, almost hollow. "He's been sick for days," she said softly. "Fever. I don't have money for the clinic." Alice's chest tightened again. Different this time. Not from her own pain, but from recognizing someone else's. She reached out, placing a gentle hand on the boy's forehead. Hot. Too hot. Her mind shifted automatically. Not as a CEO, but as someone who used to solve problems. "Has he taken anything?" she asked. The woman shook her head. "Only water." Alice nodded slowly, then stood. "I'll be back," she said. Before she could stop herself, her feet were already moving. Out of the hall, back into the night. The street was quieter now, but a small pharmacy nearby was still open, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. Alice stepped inside. The pharmacist barely looked up. "Yes," she hesitated for half a second, then spoke. "Fever medication. For a child." The pharmacist reached for a small box. 5,000 shillings. Alice froze. Her hand instinctively moved to her pocket. Empty. Nothing. The realization hit harder than expected. She stood there staring at the box. So small, so simple, and completely out of reach. She began, then stopped. There was nothing to say. For a moment she considered asking, explaining, but pride stopped her. Not the kind that comes from arrogance, the kind that comes from loss. She turned slowly. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, and walked out. The night air felt colder now, sharper, because this time it wasn't about her. She had chosen to give away her last money, but now someone else was paying for that choice. Alice stood still for a long moment outside the pharmacy. Her hands clenched slightly. Her thoughts raced. There had to be something, some way. Then slowly, she looked down at her wrist. A watch. Simple, but valuable. One of the few things she hadn't sold yet. She stared at it. Then, without hesitation, she took it off and turned back toward the pharmacy. Inside, the pharmacist looked up again, slightly annoyed. "I told you I don't have cash," Alice said, placing the watch gently on the counter. "But this is worth more than what I'm asking for." The pharmacist glanced at it. Suspicion first, then interest. He picked it up, examining it quickly. A pause. Then he sighed. "Take the medicine," he said. Alice exhaled quietly. "Thank you." She grabbed the box and left immediately. No time for second thoughts. Back at the shelter, she moved quickly to the boy's side, handing the medicine to his mother. "Give him this," she said gently. "It will help bring the fever down." The woman stared at her, shocked, grateful, speechless. "Thank you," she whispered. Alice nodded, then returned to her spot near the wall, sitting down slowly, her wrist now bare, her body exhausted, her future uncertain. But something inside her, quiet, fragile, still intact, because even now, even here, with nothing left, she was still choosing who she wanted to be. And that, no one had taken from her. Morning in the shelter arrived without ceremony. No alarms, no schedules, no urgency. Just the gradual shift of light through the high windows and the quiet stirring of people who had nowhere else to be. Alice Namazi woke slowly, her body stiff from the thin mattress, her mind momentarily blank. For a brief second, she didn't remember. Then reality returned, not as a shock, but as a weight. She sat up, pulling the blanket aside, her eyes scanning the room. A few people were already awake. Some folded their bedding neatly, others sat in silence, staring into nothing. Across the room, the young boy from the night before was awake, sitting up, his face still pale, but no longer burning with fever. His mother noticed Alice looking and gave her a small, grateful nod. Alice returned it. A quiet exchange, no words needed. Sister Grace moved through the room with calm efficiency, offering small cups of tea and slices of bread to those who gathered near the entrance. When she reached Alice, she paused slightly. "You didn't eat last night," she said gently. Alice hesitated, then accepted the cup. "Thank you." The tea was weak, the bread dry, but it was enough. As she ate slowly, something unfamiliar settled inside her. Not comfort, but stability. A temporary pause in the chaos. "Do you have any work?" Sister Grace asked after a moment. Alice looked up. The question lingered. Work. It felt distant. "I used to," Alice replied quietly. Sister Grace smiled softly. "We all used to be something," she said. "But what matters is what you do next." Alice didn't respond immediately, because she didn't know. After finishing the small meal, she stepped outside. The morning air was cooler, calmer than the previous day. The city hadn't fully awakened yet. For a moment, she simply stood there. Then she noticed him, sitting on a low concrete edge near the gate. The old man. Namazzi Kato, cleaner now. Not well dressed, but not as ragged as before. His posture straighter, his eyes sharper. Alice frowned, slightly surprised. "You're here," she said, walking closer. He looked up at her, a faint smile. "I could say the same." She crossed her arms lightly, studying him. "You look different." He shrugged. Even beggars adjust when given a second chance. There was something in his tone, subtle, almost deliberate. Alice tilted her head slightly. "I hope you use the money wisely," she said. "I did," he replied. A pause. Then more quietly, very wisely. They stood in silence for a moment. Then he spoke again. "I need help." Alice blinked. That wasn't what she expected. "With what?" He gestured vaguely. "Paperwork. Small business matters. I don't understand these things anymore." Alice hesitated. Her instinct was to refuse, not out of pride, but exhaustion. She had nothing left to give. And yet, she remembered the boy, the medicine, the way small actions still mattered. "What kind of business?" she asked. "A community cooperative," he said. "Small, local, nothing important." Alice almost smiled at that. Nothing important. She had built something that changed lives and lost it. Now she was being asked to help something small, insignificant, but maybe. That was exactly what she needed. "I don't have resources," she said carefully. "No office, no tools. I don't need those," he replied. "I need your mind." The words caught her off guard. Not because of what he said, but how he said it. Direct, certain, as if he already knew what she was capable of. Alice looked away briefly, then back at him. "Fine," she said. "I'll take a look." Kato nodded once. No excitement, no relief, just quiet acceptance. "Come," he said. They walked together through a quieter part of the neighborhood, eventually arriving at a small worn building with a faded sign hanging loosely above the entrance. Inside, a few people sat around a wooden table, cluttered with papers. Confusion was visible on every face. Arguments half-formed, decisions unfinished. The moment Alice stepped in, she felt it. That familiar shift. Not power, not authority, but clarity. She moved toward the table, slowly scanning the documents. "What's the problem?" she asked. A young man spoke first. "We're trying to register the cooperative, but the forms keep getting rejected." "Why?" Alice asked. He hesitated. "They say the financial structure isn't clear." Alice picked up one of the papers, read it, then another. Within seconds, the issue became obvious. "This is incomplete," she said calmly. "Your revenue model doesn't match your expense projections." The group fell silent. She continued. "You're also missing compliance signatures, and this section," she pointed, "contradicts your registration category." They stared at her, not understanding fully, but recognizing certainty. Alice took a pen, without asking permission, and began correcting, line by line, section by section. Her movements were efficient, precise, familiar. For the first time since losing everything, she wasn't reacting. She was leading. Minutes passed, then an hour. The confusion in the room slowly transformed into focus, into direction, into something that resembled progress. Kato watched from the corner, silent, observant, not interrupting, not guiding, just watching. Alice didn't notice. She was too focused, too immersed in something she had thought was gone forever. When she finally stepped back, placing the pen down, the room felt different, lighter, clearer. "This should work now," she said. The young man blinked. "That's it." Alice nodded. "For now." He looked at the papers again, then at her, a slow smile forming. "Thank you," he said. Others echoed it, soft, sincere. Alice felt something shift inside her. Not pride, something quieter. Recognition of herself, of who she had been and who she still might be. She turned slightly. Kato was still watching her. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, neither spoke, but something passed between them, understanding, not complete, but real. "You didn't have to do that," he said. Alice shook her head. "Yes, I did." A pause. Then she added quietly, "I needed to remember I still can." Kato nodded slowly, as if that answer meant more than she realized. Outside, the city had fully awakened now. Noise returning, life moving forward. And inside that small, worn building, something had begun again. Not a company, not yet, but something just as important. A beginning, and neither of them knew yet that this small moment would change everything. By the end of the week, word had begun to spread. Not loudly, not in headlines, but quietly, through conversations, through whispers in market stalls, through the subtle network of people who noticed when something started to work. The small cooperative that had once been stuck in confusion was now moving. Papers that had been rejected were suddenly accepted. Processes that had stalled began to flow. People who had nearly given up were now showing up earlier, staying later, asking better questions. And at the center of it, Alice Namazi. She didn't take credit. She didn't introduce herself as anything more than just helping. But her presence changed things. Structure replaced chaos. Direction replaced doubt. Even her voice, calm, measured, certain, carried a quiet authority that people responded to instinctively. For the first time since her fall, Alice felt something unfamiliar. Not success, but usefulness. And that was enough. Each morning she would leave the shelter after a simple breakfast and walk to the cooperative building. Each evening she returned exhausted, but not empty. There was purpose again, even if it was small, even if no one outside that room knew her name. But somewhere else in the city, someone did. In a glass-walled office overlooking Kampala's skyline, Vanessa Nanyonga stood with her arms crossed, staring at a tablet in her hands. Her expression was tight, controlled, but her eyes sharp, focused, unsettled. "She's still around," she said quietly. Across the room, Patrick Okello didn't look surprised. He sat comfortably behind a large desk. Fingers steepled his gaze, unreadable. "Of course she is," he replied. "People like Alice don't disappear easily." Vanessa tapped the screen, once pulling up an image. Grainy, taken from a distance. Alice, standing outside a small building, speaking to a group of people. Dressed simply, almost unrecognizable. "Helping a community cooperative," Vanessa continued. "It's insignificant, but—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Patrick understood. "It's not about the cooperative," he said calmly. "It's about momentum." Vanessa nodded slowly. "She's rebuilding something." Patrick leaned back slightly. "And that," he said, "is exactly what we cannot allow." Silence settled between them. Not tense, calculated, because neither of them saw Alice as a victim. They saw her as a risk, a loose thread, and loose threads unravel things. Vanessa placed the tablet down. "What do you want me to do?" Patrick's expression didn't change. "Nothing dramatic," he said. "Not yet." He paused, then added, "Just remind her where she stands." Later that afternoon, Alice stood inside a government office building, a folder of documents held tightly in her hands. The cooperative's registration process was nearly complete. Just one final approval remained. One signature. One step. It should have been simple, but experience had already taught her. Nothing was simple anymore. The waiting area was crowded, filled with people holding papers, forms, hopes. Alice stood quietly, her posture composed, despite the tension beneath it. When her name was finally called, she stepped forward. Inside the office, a man sat behind a desk, flipping through files without interest. He barely looked up. "Documents," he said. Alice handed them over. He scanned them briefly, then paused. His expression shifted slightly, subtle but noticeable. He leaned back. Alice felt it immediately. Something was wrong. "Is there a problem?" she asked calmly. The man closed the folder slowly. "Yes," he said. "A beat. This application cannot be approved." Alice blinked. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "We've met all the requirements." The man shrugged. "Not according to this." He turned the folder slightly, tapping a section. "Financial inconsistency." Alice frowned. "That was already corrected," she said. "You can see the updated projections rejected," he repeated, cutting her off. His tone was flat, final. Alice felt heat rise in her chest. Not anger, recognition. This wasn't about the documents. She leaned forward slightly. "Who told you to reject this?" she asked quietly. The man's eyes flickered, just for a second, then hardened. "I don't know what you're implying." Alice held his gaze. "You do." Silence stretched. Then slowly, the man stood. "I suggest you leave," he said, "before you cause problems for yourself." Alice didn't move, not immediately, because now she understood. This wasn't random. It wasn't bureaucratic error. It was deliberate. Again. Her jaw tightened slightly, but instead of arguing further, she reached out and calmly took the folder back. "Thank you," she said. The man frowned, confused by her response, but she was already turning away. As she stepped out of the office, the noise of the waiting area rushed back in, but it felt distant, muted, because inside her, something had shifted, not broken, sharpened. Outside the building, she stopped, exhaled slowly. Her hands were steady, but her thoughts were moving fast. Patrick, Vanessa. They had found her, or at least they had noticed her. and they were reminding her exactly what they had already proven, that they could reach her, anywhere, at any level, and stop her. Alice closed her eyes briefly, just for a moment, then opened them again, clear, focused. She could walk away, start smaller, hide, avoid attention. That would be safer, easier. But then, what live quietly, pretend none of it happened, except that everything they did stood no. That wasn't who she was, and maybe that was exactly why they were afraid. Back at the cooperative, the group looked up as she entered, hope in their eyes, expectation. "What happened?" the young man asked. Alice didn't answer immediately. She placed the folder on the table, looked at each of them, then spoke. They rejected it. Silence fell, heavy, disappointed, but she continued, her voice steady, "Not because we did anything wrong." They looked at her, confused. "What does that mean?" someone asked. Alice met their gaze. "It means someone doesn't want this to work." A pause. "Then it means we're doing something right." The room shifted, slightly. Confusion mixing with something else. Resolve. The young man frowned. "So what do we do?" Alice didn't hesitate this time. "We try again. But if they block us, they will," she said, calm, certain, "and we keep going anyway." Silence again. Then slowly. A nod, then another, because something in her voice made it hard to give up. From the corner of the room, Namazzi Kato watched quietly, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp, observing everything, not just what was said, but how. The resistance, the pressure, the choice, and Alice's response to it. She didn't crumble, she didn't beg, she didn't run, she adjusted, adapted, moved forward, even when the path was deliberately closed. Samuel Cato leaned back slightly, his fingers resting together. Inside, a thought formed, clear, unavoidable. They are still afraid of her. And people like Patrick Okello did not fear weakness. They feared threat. Real threat. Samuel's gaze returned to Alice as she began reorganizing the documents again, already planning the next step. Calm, focused, unbroken. And for the first time since this began, he wasn't just observing her. He was evaluating something else, not who she had been, not who she had lost, but who she was becoming now, and what that might mean. Because if she kept moving like this, then what started as curiosity was quickly becoming something far more dangerous. Interest. The rejection should have broken the momentum. That was the intention. That was always the intention, but instead of collapsing, something unexpected happened. The cooperative grew, quieter, more focused, less hopeful, but more determined. Alice Namazi didn't argue loudly about the rejection. She didn't storm back into the office demanding answers. She didn't complain or blame. She adjusted. The very next morning, she arrived earlier than usual, carrying a notebook she had borrowed from Sister Grace. Her movements were calm, but her eyes sharp, calculating. "Gather everyone," she said simply. They obeyed. Not because she ordered them to, but because something about her presence made it easier to follow. Once they were seated, Alice stood at the front of the small room, flipping open the notebook. "They've blocked our registration," she began, "so we stopped trying to go through the same door." The young man frowned. "What do you mean?" Alice looked at him. "We don't wait for permission to function," she said. "We restructure." Confusion rippled across the group. "We operate informally." First, she continued, "track everything. Build consistency. When they check again, we don't just show plans. We show proof." Silence, then slow understanding. "You mean?" "We start anyway," someone asked. Alice nodded. Yes, there was hesitation, fear, because without official approval, they were vulnerable, exposed. But Alice didn't push. She simply added, "If we stop now, they win." That was enough. The shift wasn't loud, but it was real. Work resumed, more organized, more intentional. Alice divided tasks, set simple systems, tracked daily numbers, corrected mistakes without judgment, encouraged questions without making anyone feel small. And slowly, something began to take shape. Not just a business, a structure, a rhythm, a belief. Even without official recognition, the cooperative started functioning better than it ever had before. And Samuel Cato noticed everything from his usual seat in the corner. He watched, not as a participant, but as an observer, a silent witness to transformation. He saw how Alice handled pressure, how she spoke differently to each person, firm with some, gentle with others, how she never raised her voice, but never lost control, and most importantly, how she never cut corners. There were moments when it would have been easier to exaggerate numbers, to bypass small rules, to push faster, but she didn't, even when it slowed them down, even when it cost them. That mattered, more than she knew, because Samuel wasn't testing her success. He was testing her limits, and so far she hadn't failed. One afternoon, as the group worked through another set of records, a disagreement broke out between two members. "It's not fair," one man argued. "I brought more clients, but we're splitting everything equally." "That's the agreement," another replied. "We decided this together." Alice looked up. She didn't intervene immediately. She listened, let the tension rise. Then calmly, she stood. "Both of you are right," she said. They turned to her. Confused, she continued. "The system is fair, but effort should also be recognized." A pause. Then she added, "So we adjust it." She walked to the board and began outlining a new structure, one that balanced shared benefit with individual contribution. Clear, simple, sustainable. By the time she finished, the argument was gone. Not forced into silence, resolved. Samuel watched closely. That moment stayed with him. Because leadership wasn't about control, it was about balance. And Alice understood that instinctively. Later that day, as people began to leave, Alice stepped outside for air. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the street. She leaned slightly against the wall, exhaling slowly. Her body was tired, but her mind alive. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what she was building, even if it was small, even if no one saw it. Footsteps approached. She didn't turn immediately. "I didn't expect you to stay this long," she said. Samuel stopped beside her. "I didn't expect to," he replied. She glanced at him, a faint smile. "You're not like the others here." He raised an eyebrow. "How so?" Alice studied him briefly. "You observe too much," she said, "and you don't ask for help unless you already know the answer." Samuel let out a quiet breath. "Interesting. You think you understand me?" he asked. Alice shook her head. "No," she said. "But I know patterns." A pause. Then she added, "And you don't fit the pattern of someone who needs this place." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just aware. Samuel looked ahead, his expression unreadable. "Does it matter?" he asked. Alice considered the question, then shook her head again. "No," she said. "Not unless you give me a reason to care." That answer surprised him, not because it was rude, but because it was honest. She wasn't trying to figure him out. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was simply present. Samuel turned slightly toward her. "And you?" he asked. "Do you fit here?" Alice didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted toward the street. People passing, life continuing. Then she said quietly, "I didn't choose to be here." A pause. "But I choose what I do next." Samuel nodded slowly. That too mattered. They stood there for a moment longer. Then Alice pushed away from the wall. "I have work to finish," she said. Samuel inclined his head slightly. "Of course." She walked back inside, focused, unwavering. Samuel remained where he was, watching, thinking, because something had changed. Not in her, in him. He had started this as an observation, a curiosity, a question to be answered. But now, it was becoming something else. Respect. Careful, measured, but real. And that made things complicated, because respect leads to decisions. And Samuel Cato never made decisions lightly, especially not when they involved people who had the potential to disrupt everything. He looked down briefly, then back up, his voice when he spoke soft almost to himself. "How far will you go?" Alice Namazi. Inside the building, she continued working, unaware that every step she took forward was being measured, not for failure, but for something much greater. And the closer she moved toward rebuilding her life, the closer she came to a truth she did not yet see. Because the man watching her was no longer just observing. He was waiting. Growth did not arrive like a celebration. It came quietly, in small numbers that began to add up, in routines that started to hold, in people who showed up not because they had to, but because they believed something was working. Within 2 weeks, the cooperative had changed. Not in appearance. The building was still worn, the tables still uneven, the chairs still mismatched, but the energy inside, different. There was order now. Records were updated daily, inventory was tracked, clients were logged, conversations were no longer chaotic, they were focused. And at the center of it all, Alice Namazi. She moved through the room with quiet efficiency, correcting, guiding, adjusting. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand authority. But people listened, because she made things make sense. That morning, as sunlight filtered through the cracked windows, Alice stood over a ledger reviewing the latest figures. "Your numbers don't match yesterday's report," she said calmly, pointing to a column. The young woman beside her frowned. "I thought they were correct." Alice shook her head slightly. "You skipped a transaction here," she said, tapping the page. "It seems small, but over time, that's where mistakes grow." The woman nodded quickly. "I'll fix it." Alice gave a small nod. "Good, simple, clear, no humiliation, no judgment, and because of that, people improved." Across the room, Samuel Cato sat in his usual place, his gaze steady, absorbing everything. The changes were undeniable. Efficiency, structure, trust. But what interested him most was not the system. It was Alice. Because every time she solved a problem, she revealed something deeper. Not just intelligence, instinct, and instinct Samuel knew could not be taught. It was either there or it wasn't. A voice pulled Alice's attention. "Alice." She looked up. The young man who had first spoken to her, the one who had been most skeptical, stood near the doorway holding a phone. "You should see this." She frowned slightly. "What is it?" He hesitated, then turned the screen toward her. Alice stepped closer and froze. On the screen, an article. A familiar logo, her company, or what used to be hers. Namazzi Pay expands regionally under new leadership. Her eyes moved slowly across the words. Vanessa Nyong'a's photo filled the header. Smiling, confident, celebrated. The article praised the company's new direction, highlighting growth, innovation, and leadership. Not a single mention of Alice, not one. Her fingers tightened slightly. The room around her faded. The cooperative, the voices, the movement, all of it blurred. Because in that moment, she was back there, in the office, in the boardroom, in the life that had been taken from her. "They're using your system," the young man said quietly. "The same model you built." Alice didn't respond. Because she already knew. She didn't need to read further. She recognized the structure, the language, the strategy. It was hers, every part of it. Repackaged, rebranded, reclaimed by people who had erased her. Her chest tightened, not from surprise, from confirmation. "I thought it was just business," she said softly. The young man looked at her. "What do you mean?" Alice's eyes remained fixed on the screen. "I thought I made mistakes," she said. "Bad decisions, miscalculations." A pause. Then but this. She looked up, her gaze sharper now. This wasn't failure. Silence fell around them. Even those who hadn't seen the screen could feel the shift, the weight of something deeper. "They planned it," she continued. "They needed me out to take control of it completely." Her voice wasn't emotional, it was clear, and that made it more powerful. "Do you have proof?" someone asked. Alice hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she said, and that was the problem. Because truth without proof was just suspicion. Across the room, Samuel's expression changed slightly. Subtle, but significant. Because what Alice had just said aligned with what he had already begun to uncover. His investigation had moved quickly, quietly. Financial trails, board decisions, internal communications. The pattern was clear. This wasn't just corporate conflict. It was orchestration, a calculated removal. And now Alice was seeing it too, without access, without resources, just through instinct. Samuel leaned back slightly, his fingers resting together. That mattered, because it meant she wasn't just reacting. She was thinking, connecting, understanding. Alice handed the phone back slowly, her expression composed again. Controlled, but different. "What do we do?" the young man asked. She looked at him, then at the others, then back at the ledger in front of her. "We continue," she said. The answer seemed too simple, but her tone left no room for doubt. "That's it?" someone asked. Alice nodded. "For now." A pause. Then she added, "If we stop because of them, then they've already won." The room fell silent, not defeated, but reflective, because deep down they understood. This wasn't just about a cooperative anymore. It was about something bigger. Alice picked up the pen again, resumed writing, line by line, as if nothing had happened, but everything had. Because inside her, something had shifted. Not pain, not anger, clarity, the kind that comes when confusion finally falls away. She wasn't lost anymore. She wasn't questioning what had happened. She knew, and that changed everything. Later that evening, after most people had left, Alice remained behind, reviewing the final numbers for the day. Samuel stepped closer. "You saw the article," he said. It wasn't a question. Alice nodded without looking up. "Yes, and—" She paused, then set the pen down. "They didn't just take my company," she said quietly. "They took my story." Samuel studied her. "And what will you do about that?" Alice leaned back slightly. Her eyes met his. For a brief moment, the exhaustion was gone, replaced by something else, something sharper. "I don't know yet," she said. A pause. "But I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen." Samuel nodded slowly. That answer was enough, because revenge was easy, but truth required patience, and Alice Namazi was no longer reacting to what she had lost. She was preparing for something else, something more dangerous, understanding. Samuel stepped back slightly, his voice low, almost thoughtful. "Good." Alice frowned slightly. "What?" He shook his head. "Nothing," he said. But it wasn't nothing, because what he had just seen confirmed it. She wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She was rebuilding, not just her life, her perspective. And that made her far more powerful than before. Because people who rise once can be brought down, but people who rise again with clarity are much harder to stop. Samuel turned toward the door, then paused. Without looking back, he said quietly, "Be careful, Alice." She watched him, suspicious, curious. Why? He hesitated, just for a second. Then because people who took everything from you. A pause. Won't stop if you start taking it back. He left before she could respond. Alice remained where she was, still, thinking, because something in his words didn't feel like a warning. It felt like knowledge. And for the first time, she began to wonder. Who exactly was Mazikato? That night, sleep did not come easily to Alice Namazi. She lay on the thin mattress in the shelter, staring into the dim ceiling, her mind turning over everything she had seen. Everything she had begun to understand. It was no longer confusion. It was structure, patterns, connections, pieces of a puzzle that for weeks had seemed scattered, now slowly locking into place. Vanessa's silence in key meetings, Patrick's sudden shift in tone, the timing of the audit, the speed at which investors pulled out, Brian's exit, too clean, too convenient, and now her company thriving without her, using her systems, her strategies, her work. Alice closed her eyes. This wasn't failure. It never had been. It was removal, deliberate, precise, and for the first time since everything collapsed, she wasn't asking, "What did I do wrong?" She was asking something else. What exactly did they do? And that question was dangerous, because questions like that led to answers, and answers led to consequences. The next morning, Alice didn't go to the cooperative immediately. Instead, she walked in the opposite direction, back toward the city center, back toward the places she had been avoiding, the financial district, glass buildings, clean sidewalks, security at every entrance, a world that had once been hers, now distant, untouchable. As she walked, people passed her without recognition. Some glanced briefly, then looked away. She no longer belonged to that version of herself. But she didn't stop, because this time she wasn't here to belong. She was here to observe. Alice paused across the street from a tall office building, her former headquarters, Namazzi Pay. The logo still hung above the entrance, polished, unchanged, as if nothing had happened. She stood there for a long moment, not moving, not reacting, just looking. Employees walked in and out. Laughter, conversations, normal. Everything looked normal. And that was what unsettled her the most, because behind that normal was something hidden. She crossed the street slowly, not rushing, not drawing attention, just another passerby. At the entrance, the security guard glanced at her briefly. No recognition, no concern. She stepped inside. The lobby was exactly as she remembered. Clean lines, soft lighting, quiet efficiency. For a second, it felt like stepping back into her old life. But only for a second. Because the truth was, she was a stranger here now. Alice moved toward the side of the lobby, pretending to check her phone. Observing, listening. Two employees stood nearby, speaking in low voices. They said the restructuring was planned months before, one whispered. The other frowned. Before the audit, a nod. That's what I heard. Internal. Alice's focus sharpened instantly. Planned. Months before. Her heart rate slowed. Not from fear, from clarity. She didn't move closer. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. And Brian, the second voice, asked. A quiet laugh. He didn't leave because of the scandal, the first said. He left because his part was done. Alice's fingers tightened slightly around her phone. There it was. Not proof, but confirmation. The pieces aligned again. Brian wasn't just a coward. He was part of it. She exhaled slowly, controlled, then turned and walked out. No confrontation, no scene. Because this wasn't the moment. Not yet. Across the street, a black SUV sat parked. Unremarkable. Still. Inside, Samuel Cato watched. He had followed her that morning, not closely, not obviously, but enough to understand her intent. And now as she stepped out of the building, her expression different than when she entered. He saw it. The shift. Not confusion, not pain, understanding. His driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "Sir, should we?" "No," Samuel said quietly. His eyes remained on Alice. "Let her move." Because this part was hers. Alice walked for several blocks before stopping. She leaned against a wall, briefly closing her eyes. Not from exhaustion, from processing. Because now there was no doubt. They had planned it, all of it, and that meant there would be traces, hidden, buried, but not gone. Alice opened her eyes again, clear, focused. She needed information, not assumptions, not emotions, facts, but she had no access, no contacts, no resources. At least, not the ones she used to have. Her mind moved quickly, then stopped, on one thought. Namazzi Kato. She frowned slightly. It didn't make sense, but something about him didn't fit. The way he spoke, the way he observed, the way he seemed to understand things without explanation. And now, the way he warned her. That wasn't instinct. That was knowledge. Alice pushed away from the wall. Decision made. Back at the cooperative, Samuel was already there, sitting in his usual place, watching, waiting. When Alice entered, she didn't go to the table. She walked straight to him. He noticed immediately, stood slowly. "You went somewhere today," he said. Not a question. She stopped in front of him. "Yes." A pause. "Then I went back to my company." Samuel's gaze sharpened slightly, and Alice held his eyes. "They planned it," she said. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Samuel didn't respond immediately, because now they were no longer speaking as strangers. They were speaking from understanding. "What do you want?" he asked. Alice didn't look away. "I want the truth." A pause, then more quietly, "And I think you already know more than you're telling me." Silence settled between them. Not tense, but heavy, because the line had been crossed. Samuel studied her, carefully. She wasn't accusing, she wasn't desperate, she was observing, just like him. And that changed everything. He could deny it, deflect, maintain the distance. That would be safer, simpler, but something in her expression. Steady, unafraid, earnest. Made that choice, less certain. "You're asking questions that come with consequences," he said finally. Alice nodded. "I know, and you're not ready for those consequences." She didn't hesitate. "That's not your decision." A long pause. Then for the first time Samuel smiled slightly. Not as a beggar, not as a man hiding, but as someone recognizing something rare. "You're right," he said. Another pause. Then he added, "But you're also not wrong." Alice frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Samuel stepped closer. Not threatening, not dominating, just present. "It means," he said quietly, "you're standing at a point where you can either walk away, a pause, or step into something that will change everything again." Alice held his gaze. "And you?" Samuel tilted his head slightly. "What about me?" She didn't blink. "Which one are you?" she asked. The question lingered, sharp, direct, unavoidable. And for a moment Samuel Cato had no immediate answer. Because for the first time since this began, he wasn't just watching her path. He was standing inside it. The days that followed did not bring clarity. They brought pressure, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Alice Namazi felt it before she saw it. A shift in the way people looked at her, a hesitation in conversations, a tension that lingered beneath ordinary moments. At the cooperative, everything continued as usual on the surface. Records were updated, transactions processed, clients served, but underneath, something had changed, and it didn't take long for the first sign to appear. It happened late in the afternoon. The group was closing for the day when two men entered the building, well-dressed, out of place, Not customers, not locals. Their presence alone quieted the room. Alice looked up immediately, her instincts sharpened. "Can I help you?" she asked calmly. One of the men stepped forward, his expression polite but empty. "We're here regarding your operations," he said. Alice didn't move. "Which operations?" He glanced briefly around the room. "This. Cooperative." A pause. Then he added, "There have been complaints." Murmurs spread quietly. Confusion. Concern. Alice stepped closer. "What kind of complaints?" The man opened a folder. "Unauthorized financial activity, lack of proper licensing, potential fraud." The words landed heavily. Not because they were true, but because they were familiar. Alice's gaze hardened slightly. "We've done nothing illegal," she said. The second man smiled faintly. "That's not for you to decide." Silence. Thick. Uncomfortable. Because everyone in that room understood what was happening. This wasn't investigation. This was intimidation. Alice took a slow breath, then spoke again. "If you have official documentation, present it." The first man flipped a page, then closed the folder. "We don't need to," he said. Another pause. "Then this is a warning." The message was clear. Stop or face consequences. Alice felt every eye in the room on her, waiting, watching, hoping. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step back. She simply said, "We're not doing anything wrong." The man's smile faded. "Then you have nothing to worry about." He turned. The second man followed. And just like that, they were gone. But the silence they left behind stayed. No one spoke at first, because fear doesn't announce itself loudly. It settles, quiet, heavy. "What if they come back?" someone asked finally. Alice didn't answer immediately. She looked around the room, at the people who had trusted her, followed her, believed in something she helped build, and now they were being threatened because of it. Her chest tightened, not from fear, from responsibility. "They will," she said, honest, clear. A few faces fell. "But that doesn't mean we stop." A man shook his head. "That's easy for you to say. You've already lost everything." The words weren't cruel, they were real, and they hit. Alice didn't react immediately, because part of her knew he wasn't wrong. She had already fallen. What more could they take from her? But these people, they still had something to lose. Their homes, their stability, their fragile progress. Alice stepped forward, her voice softer now. "I won't ask you to risk what you're not willing to lose," she said. The room stilled, "but I will tell you the truth." A pause. "They're not targeting this place because it's weak." She looked each of them in the eye. "They're targeting it because it's working." Silence, then slow understanding. Fear didn't disappear, but it shifted. Because fear without meaning is paralyzing. Fear with purpose can be endured. Across the room, Samuel Cato stood quietly, watching. Not just the situation, but Alice. Because this moment was different. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't problem solving. This was leadership under pressure. And there was no system for that, no structure, only choice. Alice turned back to the table, picked up the ledger. "We continue," she said. Simple, firm, final, and somehow that was enough. People didn't leave. They didn't argue. They stayed. Not because they weren't afraid, but because she wasn't. And that mattered more than she realized. That night, the attack came. Not with words, but with action. By the time Alice arrived the next morning, the door to the cooperative was broken. Wood splintered, hanging unevenly. Inside chaos, papers scattered, tables overturned, inventory gone, not stolen completely, just enough to damage, to disrupt, to send a message. Alice stood at the entrance, still. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, taking it in, understanding it. Behind her, others arrived. Gasps, shock, anger. They did this, someone whispered. Alice didn't respond, because there was no doubt. This wasn't random. It was precise, calculated, measured. Just enough destruction to hurt, not enough to draw attention. She stepped inside, carefully, her movements controlled. Then she bent down, picked up a single sheet of paper, smoothed it out, placed it back on the table. One by one, she began restoring order. Not quickly, not emotionally, just steadily. Others watched, then without being told. They joined her, picking things up, rearranging, rebuilding, silently, because sometimes action speaks louder than reaction. From the doorway, Samuel observed everything, his expression unreadable. But inside his thoughts had shifted again. This wasn't just pressure anymore. This was escalation. And that meant time was running out. Not for her, for them. Because people like Patrick Okello didn't escalate unless they felt threatened. And if they felt threatened, it meant Alice was closer than she realized. Samuel stepped forward slightly. "Alice." She didn't look up. "Yes, this doesn't stop here," he said. Now she paused, slowly straightened, turned toward him. "I know. A beat, then they're afraid." Samuel studied her, and that makes you what Alice's eyes held his. Someone they couldn't control. Silence. Then very quietly, Samuel nodded. Because that answer was correct, but also dangerous. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "You need to decide how far you're willing to go." Alice didn't hesitate this time. "I already have." A pause. Then she added, "I'm not walking away." Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Longer than before, because now there was no doubt. She had crossed the line. Not physically, but mentally. She was no longer trying to survive. She was moving toward confrontation. And that changed everything. Because once that line is crossed, there is no return. Samuel turned slightly, his voice quiet but certain. "Then neither am I." Alice frowned. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. Not yet. Because the moment was not ready. But it was coming. And when it did, everything would change. The damage from the night before did not stop the cooperative. If anything, it clarified things. No one pretended anymore. No one said, maybe it was a mistake. No one asked, what if we just wait? Because now they all understood. This wasn't pressure. This was a warning that had already turned into action. And yet by midday the room was back in order. Not perfect, but functioning. Tables upright, papers reorganized, voices returning. Not as loud as before, but steadier. Because something had changed in all of them. Fear was still there. But so was something else. Choice. Alice Namazi stood near the front, reviewing the revised inventory list. More had been taken than she initially thought. Not everything. Just enough to hurt, to slow them down, to remind them they could be touched. Her jaw tightened slightly, but she didn't stop. "Adjust the projections," she said, pointing to the sheet. "We reduce short-term output but maintain consistency." The young man nodded. "And the clients we lost, we recover them," she replied calmly. Not by explaining, by delivering. Simple, direct, focused. From across the room, Samuel Cato watched. His gaze lingered longer than usual. Because now this was no longer observation. This was involvement. He had allowed it to reach this point. He had waited, tested, measured, but last night changed the equation. This wasn't just about Alice anymore. Others were being affected, and Samuel Cato did not ignore escalation. He stepped outside quietly, pulled out the same small device from his coat, pressed it once. The line connected immediately. "Yes, sir." His voice was low, controlled. "I want a full update," he said. "Everything related to Namazzi pay. Internal communications, board activity, financial transfers." A pause. We've already begun that process. Accelerate it. Another pause. Yes, sir. Samuel's eyes shifted briefly toward the building behind him. And one more thing, he added. Yes, discreet protection. The man hesitated. For the cooperative, Samuel's tone sharpened slightly. For her. Silence. Then understood. The line ended. Samuel remained still for a moment. Because this was the first step. Not observation, intervention. And once he crossed that line, there would be no going back. Inside, Alice felt it before she saw it. Something off. Not wrong, different. The street outside, too quiet, too still. She moved toward the window, slightly glancing out. Nothing obvious. People walking, normal movement. But something in her instincts shifted. She turned back slowly. Samuel re-entered the room a moment later. Their eyes met. And for the first time, she didn't just feel curiosity. She felt certainty. You know something, she said. No greeting, no hesitation, just truth. The room quieted slightly around them. Samuel didn't deny it. Instead, he asked, "What do you want to know?" Alice stepped closer. Everything she said. A pause. Then who are you really? Silence. Not uncomfortable, but heavy. Because now there was no distance left. No pretense. Samuel studied her. Carefully. She wasn't afraid. Not of him. Not of the truth. And that made this moment different. You won't believe me, he said. Alice didn't blink. Try me. A long pause. Then for the first time since they met, Samuel Cato stopped hiding. My name, he said quietly, is Samuel Cato. The words landed softly, but the impact immediate. Alice frowned slightly. The name familiar. Too familiar. Her mind moved quickly, connecting, searching. Then her eyes widened. Just slightly. Yes. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Because in East Africa, that name meant something. Power, influence, control. Alice took a small step back. Not from fear. From recalibration. Because everything she thought she understood shifted. You were testing me, she said. Not accusing, just stating. Samuel shook his head slightly. I was observing, he replied. A pause. Until I wasn't. Alice's gaze hardened, and now that was the question. Samuel stepped closer. Not threatening, but deliberate. Now he said, I'm involved. Silence. The weight of those words settled between them. Alice exhaled slowly, processing, because this changed everything. Not just who he was, but what this situation had become. You knew, she said quietly. About them, about what they did. Samuel didn't deny it. I suspected, he corrected. A pause. Now I'm confirming. Alice's hands tightened slightly. And you didn't tell me. Samuel's expression remained calm. You weren't ready. That answer almost triggered something, but she stopped herself, because part of her understood. She looked away briefly, then back at him. And now I am. Samuel held her gaze. Yes. Another pause. Then, but that comes with a cost. Alice didn't ask what that meant, because she already knew. Truth, exposure, conflict, consequences. She took a slow breath, then said, I don't want revenge. Samuel raised an eyebrow slightly. No. Alice shook her head. I want the truth, she said, and I want it seen. Silence. Then a small shift in Samuel's expression. Respect, clear, unmistakable. Because that answer was rare. Most people in her position wanted destruction. She wanted exposure, and that was far more powerful. Samuel nodded slowly. Then we do it properly, he said. Alice frowned slightly. He didn't hesitate. Yes, a pause. You don't take down something like this alone. The room around them had gone completely still. No one spoke, but everyone understood. Something had changed. This was no longer a small struggle. This was something bigger, Far bigger. Alice looked at him for a long moment, then asked, "Why are you helping me?" The question lingered, simple but important. Samuel didn't answer immediately, because the truth was not simple. He could say strategy, he could say justice, he could say curiosity, but none of those were complete. Instead he said, "Because you gave everything when you had nothing." A pause, and that told me everything I needed to know. Alice didn't respond right away, because that moment, the street, the money, the choice, she hadn't thought it mattered, but, to him, it had changed everything. She looked down briefly, then back up, and if I had walked away, she asked. Samuel's answer was immediate. Then I would have done the same. Silence, but something in his tone said otherwise. Alice noticed, but she didn't press. Not now. Instead, she nodded once, small, decisive. "Then we do this," she said. Samuel inclined his head slightly. "Good." Outside the city continued, unaware, unchanged. But inside that small, worn building, a line had been crossed. Not just by Alice, by Samuel, and when people like him, and stepped into something. It did not stay small, it became inevitable. Because now this was no longer a question of survival, it was a question of exposure, and the truth was no longer buried. It was moving. The shift was immediate, not visible to the outside world, but undeniable beneath the surface. Alice Namazi no longer moved like someone trying to survive. She moved like someone preparing. Every action became intentional, every conversation measured, every decision strategic. And for the first time since everything began, she was no longer alone in what she knew. Samuel Cato stood beside her, not openly, not publicly, but decisively, and that changed everything. 3 days later, the opportunity came. Unexpected, but perfectly timed. A formal industry hearing was announced, an internal review, initiated by regulatory authorities in response to growing concerns around fintech governance in Uganda. On the surface, it was routine, a broad investigation, multiple companies, general oversight. But Alice understood immediately. This was a door, and if she stepped through it, there would be no turning back. "You don't have to do this," one of the cooperative members said quietly. They had gathered in the small room, the air thick with tension. "This isn't our fight," another added. Alice looked at them, then shook her head. "It became our fight the moment they decided to silence us," she said. A pause. "And if we don't speak now," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Because silence was exactly what people like Patrick Okello relied on. Samuel stood near the back, his presence quiet, but commanding. He had already prepared everything. Documents, records, financial trails, connections, not just suspicion. Proof. But he hadn't given it to her. Not yet. Because this moment belonged to her. "How do we even get in?" the young man asked. Alice's expression didn't change. "We don't ask for permission," she said. "We register." The day of the hearing arrived with an energy that felt heavier than usual. The building was large, formal, guarded. Inside, executives moved with quiet confidence, their tailored suits and polished appearances masking the tension beneath. Alice walked in, wearing simple clothes, clean, neat, but unmistakably different from the people around her. Some glanced at her, then looked again. Recognition flickered in a few eyes. Whispers followed. "Is that? It can't be." But she didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. Because this time she wasn't here to belong. She was here to be seen. Samuel entered separately. Not disguised, not fully revealed. Just enough presence to shift the air around him. People noticed, not immediately, but gradually, because power, even when quiet, is recognized. Inside the hearing room, rows of seats filled quickly. At the front, a panel of regulators prepared their documents. Names were called, companies presented. Statements were made, all controlled, all expected, until Alice Namazi. The room shifted, not loudly, but noticeably. Heads turned, eyes focused, because that name still carried weight. Even after everything, Alice stood, walked forward, each step steady, measured, and across the room, Patrick Okello leaned back slightly in his seat, watching, unsurprised. Beside him, Vanessa Nanyonga's expression tightened, and Brian, seated 2 rows behind, didn't look at her at all. Alice reached the front, stopped, faced the panel. "State your purpose," one of the regulators said. Her voice, when she spoke, calm, clear. "I am here to present information regarding the internal operations of Namazzi Pay," she said. A pause. "Specifically actions that led to my removal as CEO." The room stilled, because now this was no longer routine. Patrick smiled faintly. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, interested, amused, confident, because they knew something she didn't, or so they thought. "Do you have evidence to support your claims?" the regulator asked. Alice didn't answer immediately. Because this was the moment, the line between speaking and being dismissed. She reached into her folder, pulled out the documents Samuel had given her just before entering, placed them on the table, carefully, one by one. The regulators leaned forward, reviewed, their expressions shifting subtly, then more clearly. "This shows irregular financial structuring," one of them said. Alice nodded. "It also shows timing," she added. "Transactions approved without my authorization, followed by internal reports used to justify my removal." A pause. "And this," she pointed to another page, "connects those actions to board-level decisions made prior to the audit." Silence. Heavier now, because the pattern was visible, but not complete. Not yet. Patrick stood slowly, smiling, polished. "Interesting," he said. All eyes turned to him, but incomplete. He stepped forward slightly, his tone calm, controlled. "Miss Namazzi is presenting selective information," he continued, "without context, without full documentation." A pause. "And more importantly, without proof of intent." Vanessa followed, confident, measured. "These documents can be interpreted in many ways," she said. "But they do not prove wrongdoing." The room shifted again, because now doubt had entered. Strategically, precisely, Alice felt it. The balance tipping, not fully but enough. The regulators exchanged glances, uncertainty, and that was all Patrick needed. Because in rooms like this, doubt wins without proof. Truth collapses. Alice's hands remained steady, but inside, she knew. This wasn't enough, not yet. And then a voice. Calm, measured, unavoidable. "That's because you're looking at the wrong part of the picture." The room froze. Every head turned, because the man who had just spoken was not expected. Samuel Cato stepped forward. No disguise, no hesitation, just presence, and with it, recognition, immediate, unmistakable. The air shifted, completely, because now this was no longer a defense. This was a reckoning. Patrick's smile disappeared. Vanessa's composure cracked just slightly, and Brian finally looked up. Samuel didn't look at them. Not yet. His gaze remained on the panel. "I believe," he said calmly, "you'll find the missing context here." He placed a second set of documents on the table. Thicker, heavier, complete. The regulators reached for them, turned pages, faster now, eyes widening, because this was not interpretation. This was connection, clear, undeniable. Emails, approvals, transfers, signatures, names, all aligned, all leading to the same place. Silence fell. Not uncertain, not hesitant, certain. And for the first time, Patrick Okello had no words. Vanessa's hands tightened at her sides. Brian looked down again, because now the truth wasn't a theory. It was visible. And Alice, standing at the center of it, didn't move, didn't react, because this moment was no longer about proving herself. It was about revealing them, and there was nothing left to hide. Silence did not fall gently. It dropped heavy absolute, like something that had been held back for too long and finally released. No one moved, no one spoke, because the truth once seen clearly leaves no space for noise. At the front of the room, the regulators flipped through the documents Samuel Cato had placed before them, their movements no longer casual or procedural, but urgent, precise, page after page, signature after signature, timestamps aligning, transfers traced, internal communications exposed. The pattern was no longer subtle, it was undeniable, a coordinated effort, a deliberate restructuring of power, a calculated removal, and at the center of it, Patrick Okello, Vanessa Nyong'o, Brian Samanda. Alice Namazi stood still, her hands resting lightly at her sides. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because for the first time since everything began, the truth was speaking for her. Across the room, Patrick remained standing, but the calm confidence that once defined him had begun to fracture. His jaw tightened, his posture stiffened, but his eyes no longer in control. Vanessa's expression was worse. Not fear, not yet, but something closer to realization. The kind that comes when strategy collapses, when outcomes no longer follow expectation. Brian didn't look at anyone. He stared at the table in front of him, his shoulders slightly hunched, smaller, already retreating, because men like him did not stand in storms. They avoided them, or abandoned them. The regulator at the center of the panel finally looked up, his voice when he spoke. Different now, no longer neutral, no longer distant. "Mr. Okello," he said. The name landed sharply. Patrick straightened slightly. "Yes, these documents indicate direct authorization of financial restructuring prior to the audit process," the regulator continued. "Do you deny this?" A pause. Just a fraction too long. Then Patrick spoke. "Those decisions were made in the interest of the company," he said carefully. The regulator didn't react. "And the removal of Ms. Namazi?" he asked. Patrick's gaze flickered briefly toward Alice, then back. "A necessary transition," he replied. Samuel stepped forward slightly. "Necessary," he repeated. Not a question, a statement. Patrick's eyes shifted to him. Recognition now fully present. Tension followed. "Mr. Cato," Patrick said, his voice tightening just enough to reveal strain. "I wasn't aware you were involved in this matter." Samuel's expression didn't change. "You weren't meant to be," he said calmly. The words cut deeper than accusation, because they carried something else. Authority. Patrick's composure slipped, just slightly, but enough. Vanessa stepped in quickly. "We can't ignore the fact that these documents have been selectively presented," she said. "There's no confirmation of how they were obtained, or whether they represent the full context." "They do," Samuel interrupted. Not loudly, but final. Vanessa stopped, because something in his tone didn't allow continuation. Samuel turned his attention back to the panel. "These records were verified through independent financial channels," he said. "Multiple sources, cross-referenced, authenticated." A pause. "And they clearly show that the audit used to justify Ms. Namazi's removal was built on manipulated data." The regulator's expression hardened. He looked down again at the documents, then back at Patrick. "Is this accurate?" he asked. Patrick didn't answer immediately, because now there was no room left to maneuver, no angle to deflect, no narrative to control. Every path led to the same place: exposure. He exhaled slowly, then said, "Business decisions are complex." The room shifted, because that wasn't denial, it was deflection, and deflection was not enough anymore. The regulator leaned forward. "This is not a matter of complexity," he said. This is a matter of integrity. Silence. He turned to Vanessa. Ms. Nyong'o, your involvement in these approvals. Vanessa held her posture. Strong, controlled. But her voice. Tighter now. I followed board direction, she said. A pause. My role was operational. Samuel's gaze moved slightly, sharp, focused. And your communications, he asked. Vanessa froze. Not visibly, but internally. Because she knew. Emails, messages, approvals, all documented, all connected. The regulator flipped to another page, then another, then stopped. This correspondence, he said, suggests prior knowledge of the audit outcome. The room felt smaller, colder, because now there was no interpretation left, only fact. Vanessa didn't respond, because she couldn't, and Brian, still silent, had nothing left to hide behind. The regulator turned one final page, then closed the folder slowly. The sound echoed, not loud, but final. Based on this evidence, he said, his voice steady, we are initiating a full investigation into the board's conduct and the removal of Ms. Namazi. A pause. And effective immediately, he looked directly at Patrick. You are suspended pending further review. The words landed like impact, heavy, irreversible. Patrick didn't move. Vanessa's breath caught slightly. Brian closed his eyes. Because now it was over, not the consequences. Those were just beginning, but the illusion, the control, the story they had built, gone. Alice remained still, watching, listening, not celebrating, because this wasn't victory, not yet. It was truth, and truth needed to be seen before it could become justice. Samuel stepped back slightly. His role. Complete. For now. Because this moment didn't belong to him. It belonged to her. The regulator turned to Alice. Ms. Namazi, he said, his tone softer, now you will be contacted for further proceedings. She nodded once, calm, composed. Then for the first time she looked at Patrick, not with anger, not with hatred, but with clarity. The kind that comes when confusion is gone, when doubt is gone, when the truth is no longer questioned. Patrick met her gaze, and in that moment he understood something he hadn't before. He hadn't just removed her. He had failed to destroy her, and that was his greatest mistake. Alice turned away, not needing anything more, because the story had shifted, not just for her, for everyone in that room. Outside the city continued, unaware, unchanged, but inside, everything had moved. Because the truth, once revealed, does not disappear again. It waits, it grows, and eventually it changes everything. The days after the hearing did not explode with celebration. They unfolded slowly, deliberately, like a storm that had already broken, leaving behind silence, debris, and the quiet work of rebuilding. News spread quickly across Kampala. Not as rumors, not as whispers, but as fact. Namazzi pay board under investigation. Former CEO vindicated amid fraud scandal. Samuel Cato, linked to major corporate exposure. For the first time since her fall, Alice Namazi's name returned to the public space. But this time not as a warning, as truth. Alice didn't rush back into that world. She stayed at the cooperative, still arriving early, still reviewing numbers, still correcting mistakes. Because while the city was watching her story unfold, she was choosing something different. Stability, purpose, control. You should go back, the young man told her one morning. This is your moment. Alice looked at him, calm, back to what she asked. He frowned. Your company, your position, everything you lost. Alice shook her head slightly. I didn't lose everything, she said. A pause. I lost what could be taken. Silence followed. Because that distinction was powerful and real. Across the room, Samuel Cato listened, not interrupting, not guiding, just observing, because this decision was hers, and it mattered more than anything that had happened before. The investigation moved quickly, faster than most expected, Because once truth becomes public, it gains momentum. Patrick Okello was formally removed from all positions. His accounts frozen, his assets under review. Vanessa Nanyonga resigned within days. No statement, no defense, just disappearance. And Brian? He attempted to reach out 3 times, calls, messages, requests. Alice didn't respond, not out of anger, but because some chapters do not require conversation. They require closure. One afternoon, a formal invitation arrived. Sealed, official. Alice opened it slowly. Inside, an offer, restoration, a chance to return as CEO, full authority, full control, back to Namazzi Pay, the company she had built, the company that had been taken, now given back. The room was quiet as she read it. Everyone waiting, watching, because this was what everything had led to. "What will you do?" someone asked softly. Alice didn't answer immediately. She folded the letter carefully, placed it on the table, then looked around, at the people in that room, at what they had built together, at what had grown from nothing. And then she said, "I'm not going back." Silence, shock, confusion. "But why?" the young man asked. Alice took a slow breath. "Because that company," she said, "was built by someone I'm no longer trying to be." A pause. "I understand more now than I did then." She looked down briefly, then back up, "And I don't want to rebuild something that can be taken the same way again." The words settled, deep, because they weren't rejection, they were evolution. Samuel stepped forward slightly. "And what will you build instead?" he asked. Alice met his gaze. "Something softer now, stronger. Something that doesn't depend on power to survive," she said. A pause. "Something that gives people what I didn't have. Understanding, support, a second chance." Samuel nodded slowly, because that was the answer he had been waiting for. Weeks passed, then months. The cooperative grew, expanded, not rapidly, not aggressively, but steadily, sustainably. Alice formalized it, structured it, turned it into something real. Not a company chasing profit, but a system creating opportunity. More people joined, more lives stabilized, and slowly, a new name began to form around it. Not through marketing, not through headlines, but through impact. Alice Namazi. Not as a CEO, but as something else. Something deeper. Someone who had lost everything and built something better. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, Alice stood outside the building watching the street. Calm, present. Samuel stepped beside her. No disguise, no distance, just himself. "You changed the outcome," he said. Alice shook her head slightly. "No," she replied. "I changed direction." A pause. Then she added, "That mattered more." Samuel studied her. "And the money?" he asked. Alice frowned slightly. "What money?" "The $100, he said. She let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh. "I forgot about that." Samuel smiled, not as a billionaire, not as a man in control, but as someone who understood something rare. "I didn't," he said. A pause. "Because that moment told me who you were before anything else." Alice looked at him, curious, and now she asked. Samuel held her gaze. "Now, that was different." "Now," he said slowly, "I know who you are after everything." Silence, but not empty, full. Because what stood between them now was not curiosity, not testing, not distance, but understanding. Real, earned. Alice looked back at the street, then said quietly, "I thought I lost everything." Samuel didn't respond, because he knew she hadn't. "I didn't," she continued. A pause. "I lost what wasn't mine to keep." The words lingered, simple but powerful. Samuel nodded once, because that was truth, and truth was where everything had begun. As the city lights came on, life moved forward, unaware, unchanged. But for those who had seen, who had lived through it, everything was different. Because one woman at her lowest point had chosen kindness over survival, and that single choice had set everything in motion. Not just justice, not just truth, but something greater, something lasting, a life rebuilt, not from power, but from purpose. Sometimes the most powerful thing you will ever do is choose kindness when it makes no sense. When Alice Namazi gave away her last $100, she wasn't thinking about the future. She wasn't expecting a reward. She wasn't trying to be seen. She simply chose to be human. In a moment when the world had stopped being kind to her, and that choice, quiet, unseen, irrational, changed everything. Because true character is not revealed when we have everything. It is revealed when we have nothing. This story reminds us that what you give in your lowest moment can echo louder than anything you achieve at your highest. You may not see the impact immediately. You may never even know who is watching. But life has a way of returning what is real. Not always in the same form. Not always when you expect it. But always in a way that matters. So, wherever you are watching from, tell me in the comments. What time is it in your country right now? And have you ever done something kind when it cost you everything? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this aren't just about watching. They're about remembering who we are capable of being.